Well, hello, everybody. It's Heather with the Leadership with Heart podcast. And I am just thrilled to have Steve Hansen on the show with me today. So Steve is the CEO of an organization, healthcare kind of organization that's out of New Mexico. And I met him as the keynote speaker at an event that he had. And I was just floored by his team. I spent more than just the hour. I had a couple hours with his entire leadership group and was really just floored by how much commitment they showed towards the organization and the mission. And there were just a lot of things that piqued my interest as I have to have the leader of this organization on the show. So welcome, Steve.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So tell everybody where you are right now anyway in your leadership journey.
Well, as you stated, I'm the CEO at Presbyterian Medical Services. We're a health and human services organization in New Mexico. It's a unique, I've been here almost 15 years now, and ran a similar one of a smaller degree in Nevada prior to here. And what brought me to New Mexico in this organization is we do a little bit of everything in health and human services, medical, dental, behavioral health, early childhood education, senior centers, adult with disability, children with disability, and scattered over a large geographic area. So a lot of opportunity, a lot of challenges, and really in a lot of frontier areas that if we weren't doing it, nobody would be doing it. So that helps with kind of the mission component of feeling good about what you do. So that's where I'm at, and that's what I do, and it's kind of exciting.
It is. Boy, so you're basically saying like there's never a dull moment, right?
There isn't, and especially over the last few years hasn't been added to it. So
yes, gosh, the challenge. What were the added challenges for you, particularly as the kind of the head leader of the organization through COVID? And of course, we're still not out of it, but
right.
Where we're at right now in the journey, what were some of the bigger, more unique ones than before the pandemic?
Well, I think the pivoting quickly, health and human services, generally speaking, for our organization, has been a face-to-face interaction. Therapists talking with somebody 2 feet away, medical people, interacting with a patient 2 feet away, children in classrooms, seniors getting meals in a location. And for that world to be turned upside down in literally in a day, March 13th for us in New Mexico, was an interesting journey, and it was really inspiring of how people come together. I mean, we put together a virtual component of our organization in about 3 weeks with forms and processes and written documents and standard meetings and COVID advisory group. All kind of came together. So by the end of mid-April to end of April, we were, for a few months there, 100% virtual in everything we did. And that was inspiring to watch the leaders and people in the organization pivoting so quickly. It's amazing what an emergency can do for people either join or they check out. And we had a lot of people that checked in. So that was
yeah, I was saying that there was the time where you had everybody go around the room and they were sharing like how many years at the organization and their title. I can't remember what the other thing was, but the thing that I think it hit all of us, and it was particularly powerful to be in the room with like over 100 leaders and to hear how many folks, number one, who had been there a very long time, so in the double digits, kind of like you, but also those who had left and came back. It hit me so I was like, wow. My question was always like, in my mind, I was thinking, why did they leave? And then I was like, but even more importantly, why did they come back? And I'm still so curious about that. I feel like I'm a sociologist. I want to just go deeper and be like, what's going on with that? Like what was happening in the organization that makes them want to come? There's a draw there, right? And as somebody that does the work I do, I'm always so intrigued by why do people leave? Why do people stay? And now this idea of why people come back is intriguing. Why do you think that is? What have you uncovered to be the thing that people may leave because of whatever life circumstances, but they just tend to come back to you?
Our vice president of HR has brought that up as a percentage in the past, and I always thought it was interesting. And then it kind of hit home when we were there together, saying a third. And Diane Martinez, our our HR vice president leaned over and said, well, that's pretty much standard for the organization. That's just not the leadership group. We had 115 people there, but the percentage is almost the same for the organization. And we started having some of those discussions. I think it really comes back to we are consistent. Our mission, we're a mission-driven organization, and we care for people in the areas that I explained. And a lot of people go to work to get a paycheck. I do too. I think everybody does. But the added benefit to do it to improve your community in a consistent way, I think is one of the reasons I think that people come back, that they see that we do good in communities and want to be part of that. So it's nice to get a paycheck. It's also nice to get a paycheck and feel good about what you do. And I think that brings and keeps many people there, but brings people back after they experience, hey, there's a little something different with this organization.
I love that. Yeah, that's the strong mission. I mean, I still think that this is me. I'm gonna keep going here, Steve. I think there's something there's something we're gonna be that's even more special, because I think about, I've worked for a couple nonprofits and worked for county government. And those are kind of like mission oriented types of things too. County government, another nonprofit, and I definitely know their numbers of return people coming back aren't as high. So there's I just know there's more to it. I'm like, I'm gonna get to the bottom of that, Steve.
We spent a lot of time with our leadership group about how to include our employees in what we do, in trying to be transparent. I mean, we have to do a lot of extra effort because of how spread out we are. We have a lot of locations that have 2 or 3 people in them, and we have others that have 60 or 70 people in them. But it does mean that we have to reach out in different ways and be transparent in what we're trying to accomplish. And I do a lot of videos and present on what's going on and updating. I think we do employee engagement. We do the surveys. We have employee engagement teams that run themselves. They do check with us of what they're working on, and we kind of put the guide rails on a little bit to make sure it's possible or make it possible. But they're the ones communicating to their peers with very little involvement from executives. And so I think that builds a culture that you can say what you need to say and give ideas, and if some are accepted and some are rejected, but they're explained why they're rejected. So I think there is a lot of that transparency and communication that we really try to work really hard at. And I think we get a lot of positive feedback from employees on those type of things.
So it's a culture of listening. You know how I feel about that.
Yeah. I think a good portion in your book, I think we've done that and continue to try to do it better and reinvent ourselves.
Yes, I think that's great. And I that's what I think you're special. That's what I think you're the extra special. So there's special sauce in the mission, and the extra special sauce is the thing you just described. And I think when an organization can get to that and understand that it's a work in progress and that it's not about perfection, and that we're all on this journey, and that our intent is there. And I love the fact that it's being run, it's being supported by you and the executive leadership team, but it's being run by folks that are kind of maybe a couple levels below that, and then embraced by all the employees. And so it's a different thing. It's totally different than being just a directive from HR or a directive from and that you always in it. Completely different. It's like the organization and its mission is now live and pumping like the veins. It's like live, and right. It's a whole other feel than otherwise. It's like things are always happening to you, and then like we feel like victims, or we feel like we're kind of cogs or pieces on a board to be moved around. But the model you just described is not that way at all. So that is the extra special sauce I think that you have there.
We've been lucky, blessed, however you want to say it, with people that are willing to step up and do those things. They're creative. I mean, this engagement team during COVID did a little sock puppet Brady Bunch type of little presentation to explain what they were doing. They brought in they did a speaker that we did on video, and they brought him in, and basically recorded and let everybody but it was their idea. They chose the speaker, they did everything, and they did a little sock puppet to explain it, which was kind of low budget, but boy, now they're known as the Sock Puppet Group.
Oh, I love
and
it.
So they're doing a new project this year, and they bring back the sock puppet. And, there's just fun things like that don't have to be high tech.
Love it, love it, love it.
Yeah.
So what drives you as a leader? I mean, you've been there 15 years. What just drives you as a leader? Is there something you can point to just early on or whatever it is that drives you?
Well, I think for me, there's probably two things that drive me. I think first of all, my own family. I have 3 kids and a lovely wife, and enjoy them, and I enjoy being part of that family. And so part of it is, how do I support them, and how do I do a good job of it and make them proud of what I do? So I think that's a big component. And then finding what I like to do is really making a difference in communities. I think to combine business, I enjoy business. I enjoy solving problems. I enjoy listening, actually. And I enjoy learning, and to be able to put those into something that actually makes a difference on the ground level, and continuing to do that. 15 years here, 15 years in Nevada, almost 30 years of doing similar work. It just hasn't got old yet. So yeah, I think that's the people around me that help do that. I've gotten old, but
I am curious. So because I often find that folks that are like led to either work in a nonprofit or a mission-driven organization like this and the previous, it comes from like their parents are often it was their grandparents or their parents who like both were in service. One was a nonprofit, one was a doctor, I'm curious to know, did you have any of that kind of dynamic?
Yeah, I think my personal hero has always been my father. He was a general contractor, owned a general contractor business, and built buildings and churches and all kinds of things in Utah and California. And so he wasn't in the nonprofit world, but always in his personal life, he was always a service-oriented individual. I mean, if it snowed, I grew up in Salt Lake, and if it snowed, I knew I had to get up because we had to shovel the entire neighborhood sidewalks. That was his mindset, is okay, we're going to do our yard and our thing, and then we're going to go next door, and then the next door and next door. And that was just how he was built, and that's how we were raised in my family. And my mom was very similar. My mom was more of the tough person and dealt with the people on the side, and he did all the fun stuff and service stuff. So it was a great combination, and that was probably my most inspirational component of my life.
That makes a lot of sense. It usually always stems from something like that, and I love that fact, because what it makes me think of is automatically he's trying to improve the neighborhood. He's creating community by doing this thing that's selfless, and then he's doing the snow, helping the community. So it's still that concept right off the bat. You learned about, like, we all have a role to play in improving our communities, and I just think that's so. Isn't that just like, I don't know? It's so impactful to me to think about how much influence and control we have over this through the children that we have, and just how much we set the mark with them super early on. Right. It really is. It's like, wow. And it's actually kind of like, it makes my head spin sometimes. Like, oh my gosh, like that person just said a thing or did a thing. And I'm not saying I'm like such a great person or like that I made them do it, but just them being in that area. And it could be the bad stuff too, by the way.
Right. Yeah, it goes
right.
both ways.
Maybe it goes bad. So they'll do something like, oh shoot, I got to watch out because I know I did that or I said that, and so then you realize the impact that we have. And that's what we have. We have that same impact at work, all of us. That's why I talk about leadership with heart, but caring leadership, it's just thinking about like, how are we teaching other people by our actions or our lack thereof?
Yeah. It's hard to fake.
Oh, so true. So true. Well, one thing I find about you, interesting about you, different than many other CEOs that I've interviewed, is well, you're number one, you're like super introspective. So you really are a thinker, aren't you? I can just sense that you're a thinker. You spend time probably reviewing.
I have to be quiet so that it doesn't come through. One of them.
Yeah, exactly. But I noticed that you are more quiet. You just really take it in. I remember the time we had together, you were just taking so much in, and it's like the wheels were turning. You're just like processing. And often, what I'll find is someone in this role, they're mostly right. They're upfront. And so the processing isn't necessarily happening right there. They want to be right up front. So I like that sense of humility, and I bet you that probably comes from your dad and mom too. Huh?
I would assume so. It's in the blood, but and I've also, part of the not having success is some of those more emotional reaction times where you act too quickly. And so over these many years now, I've learned that I do much better if I listen and figure out and know when to make the decision and move forward, and when to. Usually listening longer is usually more successful than not.
I love that so much. Okay, so then now that it was a perfect segue. Can you recall a time, and if you can be specific about a story, because it's the stories that really teach us, so that people can see themselves in our stories. So tell us at that time when maybe you weren't like this more enlightened leader. I don't mean a perfect leader. I mean an enlightened leader where you've learned a lot through mistakes. What was like one example where maybe you didn't show as much care, you didn't listen well, and what did that look like? And then what did you do to kind of come out of it to at least get to the better place?
Well, there's probably a lot of examples where I could have done a lot better. I think in a couple different, one is supervisional and one is operational. Is, in the supervisional, I many years ago, I was a chief operations officer, and I was over the director of pharmacy. And the director of pharmacy had a lot of energy and kind of was an emotional person, moved, fantastic individual, did a lot of great work and had a lot of great ideas, but just kind of bounced around from one emotion to another. And she had a emotional reaction. And I remember saying, okay, fine, go do that. It was opening a facility, a clinical facility, and operating in a little different way than historically had done. And my emotional reaction was, okay, fine, you win, you go do it that way. And it was a train wreck. The staff didn't like it, the way that pharmacy was being run. They didn't like the way that the pharmacist was interacting with them. The patients didn't like it. And, after a few months, we had to take that step back and reassess and come at it a little more clinically. And say, okay, where were those mistakes and how are we going to fix this? Instead of going back at the beginning, letting the emotional conversations kind of wash over us, which we all have them, and that they happen every day, or more intense or less intense, and be able to think our way through these problems and communicate them. And that was not handled well.
What do you do now to because I can see what so basically when you're faced, do you still feel like now when you're faced with someone who's more of an emotionally charged person, or really someone who leads heavily with emotion, do you have like feel like you have a tough time kind of either meeting that person in that emotional space, handling or dealing or interpreting their emotion? Like, what do you feel like and if you are better, like how did you get better at that?
I guess I've turned into somewhat of a therapist without them knowing that I'm a therapist, but it's really asking questions. It's getting down and saying, well, how do you think that's going to be perceived? And, you seem really excited about this. Is that the way we should handle it? Or, if you took a step back, what do you think the reaction of individuals will be? It's asking a lot of questions about how people are perceiving the idea or the individual, and let people have a time to kind of take a step away from themselves and look at themselves. And generally that will point things in the right direction. It will, the logic will take over a little bit from the emotion. And so I think that tends to work things out. I think leaders, one of the most difficult things for leaders is to perceive how they're being perceived.
Mm.
And I tell people, I used the analogy a lot, is that if you have a fantastic message or a fantastic project, and you wrap that message around a rock and throw it at their head, the only thing they're going to feel is the lump it left, not the message that was wrapped around it. And I think that's served me well, better than almost any other inner moving or actions moving forward.
And so you really were doing what I call like the seeking, well, it's a seeking to understand, right? You were
Right.
by asking the right questions and going deep and really trying to, I always call it like the seeking, making the seeking fertile. Then you have to go into it with the eye of serving and not of eye of like what you're going to get from the person. You're going to give something to them, right? And so in that part, it's like the gift of listening, which is meaning the gift you're giving them is the gift of true understanding. Because otherwise, if you're not asking the right questions and you don't go for the right reasons, then you're not giving them that gift. And that's what it sounds like you were doing, or that you learned how to do after the fact, right?
Exactly.
That's a super helpful share. Okay, so now we're at the point of the podcast where it's like you get to become the podcast host. So now you get to ask me any question that you might have of me, and knowing the space that I'm in.
Well, you've interviewed a lot of leaders, and you're a leader yourself. One of the questions that continues to pop into my mind is, what are some of the common themes in leaders, characteristic or performance? Do you see a common theme of?
Well, I think like if we're thinking about, if your question is the common themes of the one who are the most effective leaders versus the leaders generally I've encountered, those aren't the same responses, right? So the ones related to the ones I've encountered, there are a mixed bag, less of them being like the ones I described in The Art of Caring Leadership, more of them being, I wouldn't say the exact opposite, but somewhere in between. Mm-hmm. So I don't, because in my mind, what I've learned not to do is demonize people, because I realize we all are carrying our own baggage. We have our own reasons why we show up one way or another. So I would say emotional intelligence is probably the number one swing factor. And so it's like, how aware are you of your feelings? How aware of you or of your biases? How aware of you of your strengths and weaknesses? And then the other way, like how aware of you of other people? How much empathy do you express? Do you work on that if you don't naturally have empathy? I would say, as we pinpoint the things that it boils down to I think effective leaders, inspiring leaders, for leaders people want to follow, it's probably that concept of emotional and social intelligence, and just figuring out what's happening in you and around you, because that's the only way you can respond. And particularly in these last 2.5 years, I mean, if you weren't an emotionally intelligent leader, you didn't work on that during that time, I mean, you probably failed all day. I mean, you were hitting your head all day long. But once it's not about perfection, like if you're in it and you had some more awakenings through the process and you were intelligent enough, and I'm not saying cognitively intelligent, I'm talking about the social emotional side of things, because that's what we had to do. We had to grow that in a big way these last couple of years. If you didn't have it, you would work hard. And if you didn't, you're failing. So that's what I would say the biggest thing is. And so I try to boil that down, like in the Art of Caring Leadership book, I try to boil down, okay, here are like the 9 behaviors. We do, these are the things. If we can really be this kind of leader, we're going to be like the total package of the leader. We're going to be the total package. Are we all there? Absolutely not. We aren't all there. But I think the key is, can we strive to be there? So yeah, that was a good question. Love it.
Well, other question is, I view myself as more of my leadership style is more group oriented versus I'm not necessarily the Lee Iacocca, I walk into a room and everybody runs over to want to ask me questions type of person. And I've seen success both ways. I have very good friends that are just so dynamic that everybody is just at awe with them. And then I've seen quiet leaders or whatever. I don't know what the term is. You probably have a term for it. Does it matter in what you've seen, or is it kind of the things you just spoke about implemented in both types of leaders?
Yeah, I definitely, that's why I call it art of, because I don't think that there is a cookie cutter type of person. I think every organization needs a different leader at a different time, depending on what the mission is. There are going to be some times when there's like a lot of turbulence and we don't want a highly emotional, like you were talking about before, the person that's like all over the place. We don't want that kind of leader in highly turbulent times. We want the ones who, like you actually, who can think things through, who can pause, who can process, and then bring the group along. But there's some times where we may need that kind of cheerleader type of one that really leads the, and it just depends on what you're doing. But I think the good thing about that is, even being the leader you are, you have all those other leaders. And inside of that, there are leaders who have those other types of gifts. And that's the beauty of bringing everybody together and bringing all the different leadership types together. I think the thing that I always outline it's the behaviors that each personality type tries to exhibit in their way that we are trying to get to. So that listening concept, the pausing, the asking the right questions, that can be done by somebody who's a full charge leader, an excitable cheerleader leader, that's small, the one that's more quiet, more humble leader. They still can exhibit those, but they're in their own way. It's not going to be done. You're not going to exhibit them the way I do, because we just lead differently. You know what I mean? So again, I think really good question. And I'm hoping those are listening also are gathering a lot from that too, because it's a really good way to think about it. So for those who are listening, do you have like a pearl of wisdom or two that you think, might help get through these next couple of years of just kind of coming out of this, and who knows what we're getting into? Some pearls of wisdom, some like motivational things or inspiring things, or words to think about, something to think about that could take them into this next couple of years. And these are going to be all leaders, not necessarily CEOs, but people who lead other people. What might you leave them with here on a couple pearls of wisdom?
Well, things have changed dramatically. I think 2020 was a big year because it was really focused on COVID, but 2021 and now half of 2021 and 2022 moving forward, it's to me it's a ground moving shift in that, it used to be focused on what the employer, who it was and how the employer was leading, and it was all about the employer. Now it's all about the employee. And I think I've had to shift. I think our managers who, are saying, oh, I just want to fire that person and go to the next person. There's not a next person. So you have to cultivate that. We have to spend a lot more time cultivating employees, listening to employees, being clear where we can with what we can and can't do with employees, and then make decisions and move forward. We can't be bogged down saying, well, employees don't like this and they will never like it. And so we're stuck with indecision. I think really listening more, connecting more, thinking about retaining from day one, and then being clear on what the job is. In my world, we have to be clear and train appropriately from day one instead of that kind of coming along. I think that's the shift that we're trying to make with our leaders and our managers is the world's changed, so you have to change, and you have to manage different, and you have to retain from day one instead of retain from year one.
Yes, that's awesome.
Don't wait to see if they're going to make it and then say, oh yeah, they're a good one, I'm going to keep them. That mentality is that's for now. And in my vision, 3 to 5 years, this is the world we're going to be in. And so we got to make the most of, if we want to accomplish our goals, we have to make sure we bring people along.
I love that. And as I think about that, I think about curation. I think of the employee experience and the journey and curating that journey. And I love, it actually starts before they even start with you. So it starts before you even hired them. And then there's that whole onboarding and then all the way through. And I like the idea of like, let's think about retaining them from day one, or even negative day one, right? But be thinking about what is that journey going to look like for them as soon as they have their first interaction with us as a prospective candidate, as a candidate, and as we go through that journey. Because if we curate that way, we'll get a better result than if we just leave it to chance, which is what I hear you saying. And so I think that's just such a strategic way of looking at the talent acquisition and retention pool. And that's what we're in right now. Like that is going to be most businesses' biggest problem over these next 3 to 5 years. So I think it is good to be thinking about it from the curation process. And so let's not leave it to chance, right? Let's not leave it to chance.
No, and then we have to move into the automation side where we can't recruit. What are we going to do to automate? And that takes a lot of investment and a lot of thought. It's not just saying, well, we're going to create an electronic form that a person used to ask, and now we have a form that they fill out. It's the depth and expense that's tied to automation is much deeper than people on the surface think. It's interaction, it's software, it's people, it's analytic people versus frontline people, and start looking out 3 to 5 years. It's looking out beyond that, and what are we going to look like? And we have to have the people we have, and we have to automate. And in a service organization, people now get what they want, when they want it, where they want it. And in healthcare, we've started to move that way, and COVID made us make a huge leap that way. And so I think it's a combination of people and technology is what we're focusing on moving forward.
Thank you so much for this, Steve. So for those who are listening right now, and hopefully you found just great value in listening to this conversation, make sure you share it far and wide. That's how more leaders get access to the content. And also don't forget to go to Apple Podcasts and write the 5-star review. That's how more and more people in the algorithm get access to it as well. We want more people learning about these concepts of caring leadership, listening and deep questions and leaning in. All of this stuff is just such good stuff. And it's timeless. It never gets old, and it always has a positive impact. So Steve, thank you so much for joining. I'm glad that I pursued you coming on here.
We're glad that we found you, and as I told you when you were with us, that you've been the best speaker we've had thus far. We do it every year, and so it was nice that we connected. It seemed like we're thinking the same way, and it was a great benefit. And our staff are still talking about it, and it's been a month. So,
oh, that's awesome. Oh my gosh. Well, thanks everybody for listening to the Leadership at Heart podcast. Be well.